Welcome back to Face the Nation. The chairman for the committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol announced a series of public hearings will be held in June, with the very first one scheduled for the 9th. Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois is a member of that committee, and he joins us this morning. Good morning to you, Congressman. Do you expect this to be more of building a public narrative, or will new information come to light in these hearings?
Well, I think certainly new information will come to light. I think it's important, we've been talking about January 6th now for a year and a half. It's important for us to lay the whole story out in front of the American people, from both what led to January 6th, the lies after the election, the fundraising, the 187 minutes the president basically sat in the Oval Office, and everything since, including the response by DOD. And it's important for us to be able to put that in front of the American people, because ultimately they have to be the judge. The Department of Justice will make decisions based on information, but the American people are going to be the ones that have to take the work we've done and decide what they want to do with it or what they want to believe after that.
We keep hearing from the committee, including the chairman, that there will be members of Congress requested to come and speak and answer your questions. It's still, none of them have come, really. Are you in favor of subpoenaing members? And if so, who do you need to talk to?
Well, I won't say who I think we need to talk to yet. I think everybody needs to come and talk to us. We've requested information from various members in terms of whether we move forward with a subpoena is going to be both a strategic, tactical decision and a question of whether or not, we can do that and get the information in time. And
do you favor
those are
one?
Decisions we make every day. Yeah, I think ultimately whatever we can do to get that information. I think if that takes a subpoena, it takes a subpoena. But I think the key is, regardless of even what some members of Congress are going to tell us, we know a lot of information around it. Right now, we're kind of not even building a broader narrative. We're going deeper with richer and more detail to show the American people.
A lawyer for Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene said this week she was not a participant in the January 6th violence. She was a victim. There were text messages revealed this week in which she was discussing martial law with Mark Meadows, then Chief of Staff. Do you need to ask her a few questions?
Yeah, I'd love to ask her a few questions. We know some things. I won't confirm or deny the text messages, of course, but let me just say this. For Marjorie Taylor Greene to say she's a victim, it's amazing how, folks like her attack everybody for being a victim. She assaulted, I think, a survivor's family from a school shooting at some point in D.C. She stood outside a congresswoman's office and yelled at her through a mail slot and said she was too scared to come out and confront her. And then when Marjorie Taylor Greene is confronted, she's all of a sudden a victim and a poor, helpless congresswoman that's just trying to do her job. It's insane. We want the information. Look, history is not going to judge her or people like her that are buying the big lie well. I firmly believe that.
Vice President Mike Pence did the right thing in terms of certifying the election. He is a central player in this story. As a Republican, do you want to see him come forward and actually speak to you?
Yes, I would love to see that. I hope he would do so voluntarily. These are decisions I think that we're going to end up making from a tactical perspective in the next week or two, as we basically pin down what this hearing schedule is going to look like, the content, and as we go into the full narrative of this thing. I would hope and think that the vice president would want to come in and tell his story, because he did do the right thing on that day. If he doesn't, then we'll look at the options we have available to us, if there's information we don't already have.
Right. I know you're not a fan of the former president, but he is in some ways playing a very large role in some upcoming primaries. In Ohio in particular, J.D. Vance, he's endorsed, a number of other candidates, Pennsylvania, Herschel Walker, Georgia. If those hand-picked candidates end up winning, is this a sign that indeed Donald Trump is still the leader and kingmaker within the party?
Yeah, I think it would be a sign. And I think, that's going to be this primary season is going to be a big moment to figure that out. So I have this organization, Country First, country1st.com, and our focus is on playing in some of those primaries to bring at least reasonable people to the forefront and encouraging folks that are going to live, for instance, in a guaranteed Republican district. Vote in that primary. It matters. And so, yeah, I do think the primary season is going to going to tell. But keep in mind the former president's tactic here. If somebody starts falling behind in the polls, he always finds a reason to unendorse them because he doesn't like having a losing track record.
Well,
so
J.D. Vance, that's what, May 3rd. When you say reasonable people, you don't think reasonable people are voting in the Ohio Republican primary for him?
Well, look, from what I've seen, there's one at least maybe reasonable candidate. But no, I mean, look, if you're J.D. Vance 2 years ago, you're a totally different J.D. Vance than you are today. This is a guy that said that he frankly doesn't care what happens in Ukraine. It's very similar to what people like Tucker Carlson have said. Look, I mean, that can't, for me as a Republican, that doesn't represent what I believe. And the party has to make the decision if they want to be that kind of party or not.
Speaker Pelosi and top Democrats were in Ukraine overnight, as I'm sure you know. Do you see impediments to getting this $33 billion that the president has asked to be passed?
I certainly hope not. I mean, look, we do have outliers of people that seem to show some Putin sympathy, but for the most part, Congress is vastly and largely united on the issue of Ukraine. We recognize Ukraine is fighting for all of us. That $33 billion is significantly less than what we would have to spend if we took Russia on directly. So I hope we don't have any impediments to that at all. I wouldn't expect we do. Senator
Kaine was with us, and he said it is too soon to begin talking about potential use of force in Ukraine. Do you think he's right?
No, I don't. I don't think we need to be using force in Ukraine right now. I just introduced an AUMF, an authorization for the use of military force, giving the president basically congressional leverage or permission to use it if WMDs, nuclear, biological, or chemical, are used in Ukraine. It doesn't compel the president to do it. It just says if it is used, he has that leverage. It gives him, a better flexibility, but also it is a deterrent to Vladimir Putin. If Vladimir Putin wants to escalate with the West, he will. It's easy for him to do it. And I think right now what we're doing with supplying, with Lend-Lease, with the financing is right. But there may be a point that we have to recognize, look, this is at prior to World War II, there were moments nobody ever wanted to get involved and eventually came to realize they had to. I hope we don't get to that point here, but we should be ready if we do.
All right. Congressman Adam Kinzinger, thank you for your time today. We'll be right back. Last week, Moderna asked the FDA to authorize its vaccine for children under the age of 6. The company's chief medical officer, Dr. Paul Burton, joins us now from Princeton, New Jersey. Doctor, welcome to Face the Nation.
Thank you, Margaret. Good morning.
Well, the FDA said Friday it will not delay one vaccine to wait for the other. In other words, they're not trying to put Pfizer and Moderna head-to-head here necessarily. Each application will be considered when the data is ready. So are you confident that Moderna will be ready for the FDA to review your vaccine at their June meeting?
Yes, absolutely, Margaret. So we submitted our data last week. I think the FDA now have all of the core fundamental data they need to be able to begin that application review. So yes, we're very confident.
You've begun it, but you won't have all of it in until May 9th, I had read. You're committed to that date?
Yes, absolutely. So the data are in, the study has been completed. We have the data. Now, typically what we then do is to package the data electronically, supply it to the FDA, so of course they can conduct their own reviews, their own analyses of the data. That's what will go in by May 9th, but they have the data that they need now to begin.
Okay. So, full disclosure, I have children in this age group. So as a parent, I'm very interested in the explanations you have for how this vaccine will work. According to the Moderna release, the vaccine is 37% effective in kids 2 to 5, roughly 50% in those 6 months to 2 years. What is your confidence level in that performance?
Yes. So first of all, on safety, and we can talk about that, the safety profile we see with this vaccine in these very youngest kids was very reassuring. Actual rates of safety events even lower than we see in the 6-year-old to 12-year-old, so that's great. But let's think about that number, Margaret, 51% vaccine effectiveness. What does that really mean? It's a vaccine effectiveness against symptomatic disease, symptomatic COVID disease, about 10 weeks after the second dose of vaccine. So what it means for parents, for caregivers, is that if they give the Moderna vaccine to these little kids, they would basically cut in half the risk of that child getting symptomatic COVID. Now the number, 50%, I know is often lower than we are used to seeing with our vaccine, but it's because this study was conducted during a time of Omicron.
Right.
When we look at the UK data that was released just last week, when we look at symptomatic disease, exactly there we see vaccine effectiveness of about 50%, but when we look at vaccine effectiveness against hospitalization, that number is 89 to 95%. So that's why I think we can be very reassured and very confident in this result.
Well, that 50% benchmark set by the FDA is key because that's usually, the floor they have for approval. But when you look at the data, you're doing a vaccine that's 25 micrograms, as I understand it, in size. It's a higher dose than Pfizer's vaccine, which was 3 micrograms. It's still being reviewed. What are the side effects for a toddler of a dose that size?
Yes. So we give 2 25 microgram shots a month apart. And when we looked at the safety, as I say, safety profile was very reassuring. Lower events of safety in this very young age group, even compared to the 6 to 12-year-olds. Common side effects are injection site pain and some fever. Really a lot of what all of us have after a vaccination. But again, reassuringly, when we look at the rates of very high fever, so fever over 104 degrees Fahrenheit, only 0.2% of these little kids experience that. And typically in this age range for other approved vaccines, we would see rates of maybe 1%. So I think overall very reassuring.
You mentioned safety, and I'm glad you bring that up because I know your application for the vaccine for that age group 6 to 11, 12 to 17, that's been pending before the FDA since June of 2021. So why do you feel comfortable putting your vaccine in my 3-year-old or someone's 4-year-old if the FDA hasn't approved it to be put in the body of a 12-year-old?
Yeah, well, so look, now we've submitted additional safety data to the FDA for the 12 to 18-year-olds. We've also just submitted our application for the 6 to 12-year-olds as well, and now we have the data on the very youngest kids.
So do you expect the FDA to approve it for those older age groups? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I mean, those applications are now under active review by FDA, so they have the full spectrum of data with us. And we are, of course, approved for over 6-year-olds in many other countries around the world where it's being used safely and effectively to provide protection for those young kids. So I'm very hopeful that the FDA will follow suit here across that full age range.
So I guess the fundamental question here is when we talk about that benchmark of 50% is putting a vaccine in the smallest of children who don't have any protection, right? They're too young to even wear a mask, many of them. Is just getting some protection worth it? Or does it need to meet that standard 50% benchmark the FDA sets?
Yes, so the 50% benchmark, really was in a pre-Omicron era. As I say, we know now that 50% means to cut in half your risk of symptomatic disease. I think from the antibody levels that we also saw in this study, we can expect high protection against the important thing, which is hospitalization, even death. Omicron is not a mild disease. In kids, we see data from Hong Kong, the rates of admission of kids to pediatric intensive care units very high. So what I think we can reassure parents, caregivers here, is that if approved, this vaccine should be able to safely and effectively protect your kids, your youngest kids, against severe disease, hospitalization. That's what counts.
And for adults, when do you expect a rebooted version of the vaccine to be available, a booster shot that would work against Omicron, for example?
Yes. So look, even Spikevax, which we have now, the Moderna vaccine, does provide protection, certainly against severe disease, hospitalization. People are eligible now to get boosted. I would absolutely recommend it. We're still in this BA2 wave, other variants sweeping now throughout the United States. We announced a couple of weeks ago a new variant-specific booster that we've been tested, and we have an additional candidate, our lead candidate, in testing now that I believe is going to be even more superior. So, Margaret, we are confident that by the fall of this year we should have large amounts of that new booster vaccine that will protect against Omicron and other variants and really protect Americans and people around the world as we go into fall of 2022.
Doctor, thank you very much. And we will be watching closely what happens next. We'll be back in a moment with Dr. Deborah Birx. Stay with us. It's been more than a year since we last spoke with Dr. Deborah Birx, the White House Coronavirus Task Force Coordinator during the Trump administration. And she told us about her time in the administration, spoke candidly about mistakes that had been made, especially with the CDC. And many of those details are recounted in her new book, Silent Invasion. Dr. Birx is here with us in studio. Good morning to you, Doctor.
Good morning, Margaret. Happy to be here.
I'm glad to see you again. I want to talk about the book, but we did see you last night at the Correspondents' Dinner. We were both there as guests of CBS. These indoor gatherings are happening across the country now. Dr. Fauci said it was too dangerous for him to attend. How do you judge risk?
I have to judge it every day because, like you, I have children under 5, unvaccinated grandchildren, and I have a 93-year-old that lives in our house. So I have to constantly be aware of my risk, yet I have to work. So I completely masked last night because my assessment was there were probably, just by odds and science, probably 15 to 20 people infected, even though everyone was tested in the morning or within 24 hours. And so I just always know, and then I keep testing. So I'll test every day for 5 days after an exposure, and I consider that an exposure. I tested this morning because I knew I was going to see you in person on mask. And I think that's just what we need to do. If you have vulnerable people in your household, whether it's children or elderly, you have to continually assess your risk.
Thank you for the guidance on that. And as you said, I'm aware of it because of my kids. We're now at close to 1 million deaths. Infection rates are going up. Hospitalizations are going up. I think it was just about 18% on the week. Do you think we are done with these massive waves of infection?
I like to look at the whole spectrum of the last 2 years. And so if you look at what we've been through, we went through a mini alpha variant surge in the same locations last year at this time. Then we went into that lull of May where everybody thought it was over, and middle of June, and then we had the predictable surge across the South. And what you need to be looking at is global data. So I follow South Africa very closely. They're good about testing. They're good about sequencing and finding their variants. They're on a upslope again. Each of these surges are about 4 to 6 months apart. That tells me that natural immunity wanes enough in the general population after 4 to 6 months that a significant surge is going to occur again. And this is what we have to be prepared for in this country. We should be preparing right now for a potential surge in the summer across the southern United States because we saw it in 2020 and we saw it in 2021.
Wow. That's not general consensus right now. That's a warning. You think that's what's coming for the South? Is it this new variant?
Well, each of these surges have been a slightly different variant because, yes, our immune system wanes. Now, who's carrying the virus that participates in these surges? We are. Vaccinated individuals as well as unvaccinated individuals. And we have to make it very clear to the American people that your protection against infection wanes. So if you're going to go see your grandmother or someone that has metastatic breast cancer or someone under treatment for Hodgkin's disease or a family member with Down syndrome, you need to test before you go if that area is in a surge and if you assess your risk, like we did last night, and make sure that you're negative.
And so what you're seeing in South Africa, you do think is a leading indicator for what may be coming here?
Correct. What has happened each time is we've had a summer surge across the South and a winter surge that starts in our northern plains and moves down, accelerated by Thanksgiving and the holidays of Christmas, Kwanzaa, and Hanukkah. And that's predictable. So now we have to figure out, we have tools, better tools than we had a year ago. So we have the tools now to enable every American to not only survive, but thrive. But that means every American has to have access to these tools. And our rural counties, those red counties that people keep talking about, they have lack of adequate health care, lack of primary physicians, lack of individuals to counsel them about vaccines. I went to Elko, Nevada. They are 3 hours from a hospital that could take care of COVID. So we have to be attentive to all Americans, no matter where they live.
You, in your book, talk about some of these institutional issues. You're talking about at the state level, but also at the CDC, at Health and Human Services as well. In your book, you say there was no plan B then, and to this day, there is still no plan B. There is no early warning system in this country. Why hasn't this administration been able to fix it? Because you're not the only person who said this.
You know, I'm thrilled that over the last 12 months, people have been giving more and more voice to it. To be frank, that's why I wrote the book, because I felt like people weren't understanding what the issues were on the ground that were resulting in Americans not surviving. Every American needs to be able to click on a website that shows them what is happening in their community with test positivity, cases, and hospitalizations are great.
Throw that off. Sorry, I don't mean to continue your thought. Hospitalizations, that's what the CDC says focus on. You're saying don't focus on it.
Well, if you wait till hospitalizations, there is so much community spread that you cannot prevent it from getting into the nursing homes and to vulnerable family members because we interact with each other. And so people are interpreting that the fact that they are vaccinated or vaccinated and boosted, that they can't be infected, that they're somehow invincible. And they're carrying that virus into hospital rooms, into nursing homes, and into the dining room tables where their vulnerable family members sit. And let's be clear, not every vulnerable family member has an effective immune response either to the vaccine or the booster. And so we need to know if they're protected or not. And so we have to be able to utilize those antibody levels in some way. I can tell you today, if your grandmother has no antibody, don't think that their cellular or their other side of their immune system is going to protect them. They're going to need something else. We have those tools now. We have Depot, monoclonal antibody, EvoShield. There are tools that we can use.
Doctor, thank you for your insights. We have to leave it there, and we'll be back. Next Sunday, we'll be talking with former Attorney General Eric Holder. That's it for us today. Thank you all for watching. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.